Good evening, friends. Welcome to another Friday night. I'm back with another tale from my collection, a short story from my book, Dark Fragments. Now it's time to grab a snack, dim the lights, and let me take you into the night with a story I call Feathers. For several years, I've been trying to get my work published so I could give up my full-time job as a home remodeling specialist. Yeah, construction worker. And make my living as a writer. Several novels and a couple of books line the shelf of my desk in 3-ring binders which I use to organize them. The wall behind my desk chair is covered with the defeats of rejection letters and a few ever so small but enormously satisfying triumphs of my fledgling writing career. More than 30 synopses lay in a hidden file in my computer waiting for their opportunity to become full-length novels and books. My friends and family who've read any of my work encourage me to keep the dream alive, but it's hard. Being skeptical by nature, I've often thought that the praise I receive for my work is of a loving nature and has very little to do with merit. This, I am happy to say, is not so. At least not entirely. My sister works 2 jobs. During the day, she builds and remodels houses with me, while at night she works on a janitorial cleaning crew in a large computer company. I pay her more than the other company, but they can give her the one thing I can't: diversified companionship. We work side by side, day after day, and the only change of people we see are our customers and the occasional carpenter or laborer we hire as needed. For myself, this is okay, as I like to be left alone with my thoughts. She, on the other hand, is 10 years younger than me and likes the crowd scene. Not long ago, I agreed to pick her up from work one Friday night since her car was in the shop. Curious about her night job, I arrived at the computer company 30 minutes before her shift was to end. The security guard informed me that they'd finished up early and were lounging in the break room until shift was over. As I approached the break room, my sister's voice resonated from the open door with the cloud of cigarette smoke which was being drawn into an air return duct in the ceiling of the hallway. I stopped outside the door when I realized she was talking about my writing and listened. For the next 20 minutes, she recanted a lot of my synopsis and parts she liked in the completed novels. It was a good feeling to know that she truly liked my work, and even better were the responses from the 15 or so people who were gathered around. That night, we went back to my house and sat up talking in my office. She was unaware that I'd been eavesdropping, and as we talked of my stories, she told me how she'd been talking to the others about my work. Several of them had asked her the same question she's always asked me many times. Where do I come up with the ideas for these books? They had also said that I was on the same wavelength with a famous author whom I both love and despise. Several times during our late night talks, she's made reference to the fact that I'm somehow connected to this other writer. These thoughts and more were running through my head as I walked in the forest. I had received yet another rejection letter today, and in the crushing momentary rush of disappointment and despair which comes with each of them, I hopped into my 4-wheel drive truck and headed for the hills. In the mountains I find solace and lots of quiet where I can think and rejuvenate my resolve. I have no intention of ever giving up my dream of being a published writer. It is just a matter of time before I'm discovered and the world is given a taste of my magic. The sun hovered just over my left shoulder as I made my way. Pine needles, warmed by the sun, cast their scent into the air to mingle with the smells of spring erupting from the ground in the form of shrubs and grasses. I hadn't been to this area since the previous fall when I was deer hunting, and this day found me wandering. Although the area I chose is bordered by miles of national forest, I'm familiar with the major landmarks and have no fear of getting lost. In fact, after hunting the area for several years, I'm able to head in any general direction and know where I will come out eventually. Occasionally, I head off in a direction knowing where I will come out, and am surprised when I find an area I haven't seen before in between. I guess I can attribute this to the fact that the area I like is about 25 square miles. Someday I might know every square inch, but for now, the surprises are nice. As sometimes happens, I was standing on a hilltop watching a herd of elk browse in the valley below, and suddenly an idea for a novel began to emerge from my thoughts. Excited, I looked around to determine the shortest path to my truck, and when I knew where I needed to go, I headed there. From the depths of my disappointment, another novel had been born. I had to get home and put the synopsis in my computer. No telling when I would actually write the book, but I didn't want to lose the idea. I'm kind of funny that way. When I start a book, I do not start another until I'm done with the one I'm currently working on. I have this fear of ending up with a bunch of half-finished, incomplete works and nothing to show for my time. I would write down the ideas, and then when I finished the current book, I would peruse my synopsis collection for the one that excites me, and be off again. My truck was about 2 miles as the crow flies from my position, and I set a steady pace toward it. About halfway there, I crested a small hill, and was surprised to find a small house standing in the clearing below. There were no roads leading to it, and the grass was undisturbed as if it had been set there by a helicopter. I approached slowly, looking for dogs, and was surprised to see that the structure was fairly new. At first I thought maybe I had found a miner's cabin, which had been long abandoned, but the condition of the house said it was only a couple years old at most. Curious, I walked around the house looking at the workmanship. Someone had lovingly carved the porch railing by hand. The handrail was smooth, polished carefully, and invited visitors to step onto the porch. Ascending the stairs, I was immediately struck by the firm yet warm feeling of the knotty pine boards beneath my boots. This was the kind of workmanship I longed to put into a project, but was constrained by budgetary considerations. Someday, maybe a customer would be willing to pay me for this type of detailed craftsmanship. But for now, I had to be satisfied with bending nails in lap siding and sheetrock. The front door was carved from a large slab of wood taken from the heart of a large ponderosa pine. Many hours had been spent carefully etching the forest creatures and designs which adorned its hand-rubbed surface. Looking in the windows of the door, the interior was bare of furnishings. The door opened easily, and as the thought of trespass crossed my mind, it was quickly replaced by the knowledge that the builder would bear no grudge at another carpenter admiring his work. I was not here to harm anything after all, but to admire the work. The walls were covered with pine strips, stained with linseed oil, and not a nail or knothole was visible in the whole room. The ceiling consisted of rough-hewn timbers, coming to a peak at a large lodgepole pine. My eyes roamed from one wall up across the ceiling and back to the opposite wall before looking down at the floor. Hardwood pieces had been laid in a seemingly random pattern about the floor, forming intricate patterns. The patterns seemed to draw my attention across the room, where I noticed the stones forming the fireplace hearth. The firebox was made from rocks like those in the surrounding hills, and a black forged mesh chain hung across to keep back sparks. Several of the facing stones were carved with deer and elk in natural poses, and as I looked at the fireplace as a whole, I realized the stones were carved in such a fashion as to display an entire forest scene. The wood mantel was oil-stained, much darker than the rest of the room. The top of the mantel was shiny from hand-rubbing, and not a speck of dust had settled there. The only thing in the entire room which seemed out of place was the feather on the mantel. On the right side of the mantel, a single white feather rested in a casual arch on the polished surface. The quill of the feather seemed to point at an adjacent wall, and as my gaze followed in that direction, I was surprised to see a picture hanging on the wall. Somehow, in my random perusal of the room, I had missed the painting hanging there. Looking around, it was the only one in the entire room. The scene depicted was of a beach at sunset, and a seagull was flying in a wheeling turn away from the viewer. It was as if the gull had just flown into the picture and was not yet far enough away to become a part of the scene. The feather and the picture were related, that I was sure of. But how? To the left of the picture, a narrow staircase led to a warmly lit landing area above. I considered leaving, but having come this far, I was not about to leave before exploring the whole house. I was enthralled by the craftsmanship here and wanted to see what else this house had to offer. Resting my hand upon the banister, I began to climb the stairs. The red oak was warm and familiar to the touch. It felt as though I had climbed these stairs before. A calm, comfortable feeling came over me as I reached the landing and decided to explore each room as I went. The first was a broom closet to the left of the landing, and as I opened the door, a warm draft of air rushed out. The smell of fresh-cut cedar was pleasant. I reached for the pull cord to turn on the light and gasped at the intricacy of the woodwork in this closet. The man who had built this house did not let his craftsmanship rest, even in the closet. The closet was a moderate walk-in style, and I stopped for a better look. To my left were shelves from the floor to the ceiling, and to the right, on either side of the central walkway, both walls were lined with two shelves above eye level, supported above a wooden rod for hanging clothes. There seemed to be another room at the end of the closet, which I surmised must be another storage area for long-term or maybe out-of-season clothes. Closer inspection revealed my hunch to be true, but I was surprised to find a mirror hanging in this area. I walked over to look in the mirror, reaching for the light string as I stepped in. To say I was surprised by what I saw in the mirror would be an understatement. Instead of my own reflection, there was a view of a large white room decorated in marble. Large picture windows looked over an ocean bay where seagulls whirled in a breeze. On either side of the windows, large polished marble columns rose to high ceiling, framing the windows and giving an air of elegance. In the center of this room, a man sat at a computer desk furiously typing. He paused, looking up toward the mirror, and I recognized him as the author whose works I both adore and loathe. His writing and notes in his novels provided the inspiration for pursuing my goals as a writer. In my mind, he epitomized the best and worst of writing. He looked at the mirror for a moment before getting up and walking over toward where I stood. I backed up suddenly, finding my back against the wall and feeling like an intruder. He looked deeply in the mirror, as though he could not see me but knew I was there, and stared intently. I stood perfectly still, knowing he couldn't see into the darkness which covered me. Suddenly, he reached up to his eye, and I was surprised to find something had gotten in my eye also, and I was reaching for it. When my hand moved from my eye, the image in the mirror was no longer of the mirror and the marble room beyond, but rather of the author and the view in the mirror behind him, from his perspective. I turned quickly to look behind me. I was no longer in the closet, but rather in the marble room. Looking back at the mirror, I saw not my own face, but the reflection of the author I had been watching. How did I get here? I walked over to the desk and looked at the words on the computer screen. He had been writing a detailed walkthrough description of the house which I had found in the woods. Well, I hope you enjoyed that one. If you liked the story, how about giving me a like and consider hitting that subscribe button. Many times I've written something or had an idea only to find that someone else has already covered it. It makes me believe that somewhere out there is a massive collective consciousness that all writers get their ideas from, and whoever finds one first brings it to life for everyone else. Thank you for spending your time with me. Tell me what you think in the comments, and I'll be sure to join in the conversation. That's all for tonight, but I'll be back next Friday with another story. So, until then, sleep well.